talk about tonight. The first one is what I believe is Joseph's lack of forgiveness. I just do not think he has forgiven his brothers. He still needs to forgive his brothers. He's caring for them. I mean, his intent is not to kill them or to bring any lasting harm to them, as is seen by he provides them with as much food as they can carry and all of their money. But yet he's playing with them. He uses his position in order to give them a hard time. Now, I believe that he's doing that. He's using his position to give them a hard time. They don't know it's him. They're like freaking out over all of this because this is like the worst possible outcome from their perspective. The second thing is Joseph may be testing them to see if they have, changed from how they were when they got rid of him. And I think that he's doing that too. He's testing them. He's trying them. It is an extended kind of thing that's going on in order to see where they're at and what they're thinking and how they're feeling. And I think that he's doing that also. And I think that is wrong too. I just don't think that that is the biblical model of forgiveness. The biblical model of forgiveness is not giving forgiveness when someone deserves to be forgiven. You know what I mean? And that's the worldly approach to forgiveness. The world gives forgiveness when the person merits that forgiveness. But we'll come back to that at the end. So I think he's using his position. I think he's giving them a hard time. I think he's testing them. And he's just kind of yanking all the cords. He's just playing with them all around. He's doing all these things and giving them a hard time. Now, in this last test, or whatever you want to call it, he puts his divination cup in Benjamin's pack. And when he confronts them with it, the brothers basically condemn Benjamin to death. In verse 9, they say, with whomever of your servants it is found, let him die, and we will be my Lord's slaves. So they condemn Benjamin to death, by not knowing it, of course, and they condemn themselves to slavery because, the thought that any of them took it was just kind of, they just did not believe any of them would have taken it. And they're right. None of them did take it. Joseph planted it there. So because of this, they come out with, let him die. It's pretty extreme, but that's what they say. And of course, Joseph comes right back, and he ignores this to death part, and he says, I'm going to take the one whom I find the cup with. I'm going to take him to be my slave, and you all can go home. So it's like he's conspiring here to keep Benjamin. He's trying to keep his dear brother with him. And maybe this is a part of the test to see if his brothers are going to abandon Benjamin like they abandoned him. I don't know. But it's like Joseph is planning that Benjamin be the one who comes and let everybody go home with their food, of course, and their money, to take it back. So in verse 17 says, but he said, far be it from me that I should do so. The man in whose hand the cup was found, he shall be my slave. And as for you, go up in peace to your father. So he's gonna let them all go, but he wants to keep Benjamin with him. Now this is going to come back, I think, a little bit later in a moment. So he does this. Joseph does this even after Judah has offered them all to be his slaves. It says, Judah came to him in verse 18, O Lord, please let your servant speak in your hearing, and do not let your anger burn against your servant. You are even like Pharaoh. And then he goes into this story. So he's doing this. He wants to keep Benjamin. He's not forgiving them. He's giving them a hard time. And then, and this has always been puzzling to me, verse 15, Joseph said to them, what deed is this you have done? Did you not know that such a man as I can certainly practice divination? And again, whether he actually practices divination or not, I don't know. Obviously, he's got this divination, this divining cup, and he makes this appeal to this practice of divination, which for them would not have been strange. They would consider an Egyptian as somebody who would practice divination. So that wouldn't have been strange from their perspective. But still, Joseph, if he is not practicing divination, this is just an example of how he's using his Egyptian status to confront them and to convey to them, hey, look, you couldn't have gotten away with this because I am one who practices divination, as if there was something to it. So all of this is just keeps on to support this thing that Joseph, I think, is struggling with forgiving them and over an extended period of time, because they go back and they come and this is an ongoing issue with him. So what is he doing? And like I said, I think he's using his powers and a position to give his brothers a hard time. I think he's testing them to see if they have changed. Would they abandon Benjamin? Are they willing to accept responsibility for their actions and step up to the plate, so to speak? Joseph is possibly doing all this to see if that's what they're like. But is it really, and here's the question, here's the trouble I have with all of this, is it really Joseph's position to do these things? I mean, does he have a right to exercise this kind of testing on them in order to see where they're at? And honestly, my own position is not just with this, but the thought of testing others to see where they're at, I just don't go for that approach. I mean, life is hard enough without intentionally putting something in front of someone to see how they're going to respond to it. Now, I'm not opposed to, well, let's see how well you can do this, and then, determine, this or that. Or, let's how are you handling, or observing people, how are you handling this? I'm not opposed to any of that, because how we live our life, the decisions that we make and the choices that we make all reflect who we are. How you speak or don't speak is a reflection of who you are. The actions that you choose to do or don't do are a reflection of who you are. And I am watching. I can't help but watch. I just kind of observe everybody just in the normal course of things. And every time I observe something like that, it's just another little piece to, of the puzzle of who you are to me, right? And I think we all kind of do this to some degree, but there's no need to step it up and test you intentionally to see how you're going to respond. And maybe it's because of my first experience of this, when the deacon in the first church that I went to, who I was a new believer, who intentionally scattered pieces of paper on the floor to see who's going to pick them up. And of course, I was one of the guys who just kind of walked by and didn't just see it at all. But then to hear him, get in front of everybody and say that he did this, and it's like, okay, well, I failed that test just like I failed all these other tests, and thanks a lot for that. You could have just asked me if I was going to see them or not, and I would have told you I probably wouldn't have seen them, being a teenager. But anyway, I was preaching at a church, and they were looking for a pastor. So the whole experience, and I wasn't the only one, but the whole experience is that every person who came to preach there, they had lined up a series of tests. Now, I don't know if it was the same tests each guy, but the first one was they gave me bad directions to the church. I had never been there, before. So they gave me bad directions to the church to see if I could find the church, think on my own and make it to the church. And then I had a deacon come up and say he was had to work on Sunday, should he do that? And then there was another deacon who said he's getting divorced. No, the father of one deacon was talking about another deacon, that he was getting divorced. Should he still be a deacon? And it was just like the lady. She comes up to me and she whips out $1 and she holds it while she asks me a question to see if I'm going to reach for the money. She took it out like she's going to give it to me to see if I was going to reach towards the money and take it. So it's, afterwards it was like, well, the guy was really nice at the end, and I'm thinking to myself, even if I pass these tests, I'm not coming here because I don't need this grief. You know, I've got enough grief to, I didn't get lost, and I didn't reach for the money, and I didn't do any of those things, but as I left there, and it was an unspiritual experience for me, even though I was the preacher, because I had all of this other stuff just coming at me. So anyway, I just don't go for that. You know, like I said, we're all facing just normal life situations, and all you have to do is start a conversation with somebody. You're going to hear it come out. It's going to come out of you, and it comes out of me. You're going to hear it. So there's no need to do all of this, and I think that Joseph, he's using his position here. He's resentful. You can't blame him. They took him from his family and sold him. They were going to kill him. You can't blame him for wanting to do this. But that's not the point. It's, you know, even though he can't be blamed, I mean, we can understand and relate to it because this is human nature to act in this way. That doesn't mean that it's the right way to do it. And I just don't think that Joseph is doing this right until this chapter comes to an end. And I'll explain my thought in a moment. So he's, you know, basically he's acting as if he's the head of the family, and he's testing his children to see if they've changed. And I just think he's out of line here. He's just kind of overstepping his authority within the family there. If anybody should have done anything, it would have been Jacob, who should have whipped them into shape after all of these years. And we've seen how Jacob is kind of waffling, especially when it comes to Benjamin as well. So, you know, the family dynamic hasn't changed much. It hasn't fixed much. It has made progress. And I think, everything the brothers say to Joseph is completely open and honest and truthful. They do not hide. They even talk about what they did to their brother, Joseph, not knowing that it was Joseph there. They're completely open. They're completely honest the whole time. I can't find any falsehood on their part. They're even willing to give of themselves for the sake of, you know, another brother in order to let them go. So I think some progress has been made within the family. Now, I think, and this is the second part, Judah's confession is kind of the turning point in the heart of Joseph. Judah's confession here is the turning point in Joseph's heart, where he finally comes to, comes to grips for this. And maybe even here, not for the right reason. But it's right after this, in chapter 45, where he is going to reveal himself to his brothers with tears. I think the part that really strikes Joseph's heart is when Judah is talking about Jacob and Benjamin and himself. So you know, it's Jacob and Rachel who had Joseph and Benjamin. And that's kind of the little close group within the whole family. That's the group to which Joseph belongs. And when Judah starts to talk about how Jacob's going to die, if Benjamin dies, and just like Joseph had died, I think all of a sudden that's kind of the tipping point on in Joseph's heart. So in verse 27 he says, "Then your servant, my father, said to us, 'You know that my wife bore me two sons, and the one went out from me, and I said, surely he is torn to pieces, and I have not seen him since. But if you take this one also from me, and calamity befalls him, you shall bring down my gray hair with sorrow to the grave. Now therefore, when I come to your servant, my father, and the lad is not with me, since his life is bound up in the lad's life.'" I think that right there is just kind of the point that gets the closest to Joseph's heart. Now, after all, just think about this for a second. Joseph did not know what happened after he was sold. He didn't know what his brothers told his father. He didn't know what his father's position or understanding was about what happened to Joseph. Joseph doesn't know any of that. He has been sold off. And so maybe part of this is that what does my Father think about all of this? What did my Father think about me being sold by my brothers? What did he think about all of this? Did he just let it happen? Did he not do anything about it? And so that's part of Judah's confession here, where he reveals what their father believed or thought about what happened to Joseph. So anyway, that's just kind of what I think here. And then this last part, I want to come back to this idea of what biblical forgiveness is. Jesus forgives by grace, not by merit. And, we must be thankful for that, because I don't deserve God's forgiveness. He died for me. He paid the penalty for me. And I'm not forgiven because I've reformed or I have fixed my way somehow. I am forgiven because of what he has done, because he loves me and he forgives me freely. And it says in Ephesians 1:7, in him we have redemption through his blood, the forgiveness of sins, and here it is, according to the riches of his grace. That's why we have forgiveness, because of his grace, not because I deserve it. And then the Christian is responsible for forgiving in the same way that Christ forgave. Not by merit, but by grace. Be kind to one another, tenderhearted, forgiving one another, even as God in Christ forgave you. Ephesians 4:32. So it can't be any clearer than that. We are to forgive like Christ forgave us. And then in Colossians chapter 3, verse 13, bearing with one another and forgiving one another, if anyone has a complaint against another. Now this is like a key verse on how to treat one another. If anyone has a complaint against another, so you have a complaint against somebody else, what are you supposed to do? Even as Christ forgave you, so you also must do. That's Colossians chapter 3, verse 13. So our responsibility to forgive others is not to forgive them when they confess, when they say they're sorry, when they change their ways, when they do all of these things. That's not when we forgive. We don't forgive when they deserve to be forgiven. We forgive by grace. And we go on. Now, the whole topic of forgiveness is huge. And I don't want to get into that. But at the foundation of forgiveness, because there are so many, little considerations that tie into this. But at the basis of forgiveness is a free forgiveness, not because it's deserved, but because it's by grace. And I'll tell you, people are surprised over the years here. You know how we fill out those forms for children's workers, and you have to put whether you've been arrested or anything like that before, or somebody who has been caught in a sin. All of a sudden, they're like, well, I can't serve in the church, and I've got to resign from all of my positions. That's kind of when they're caught, that's the attitude that they have. And sometimes that happens depending on, how it goes, but a lot of times it's like, well, you come up front, you forgive, you confess before Christ, and we'll just keep on going. We'll see, what happens. There has to be grace. There has to be it. If it's not going to be here where you get a true second chance, there is nowhere in this world where you're going to get another chance. And there has to be that you get another chance here. If Christ truly forgives you, who am I to hold it against you? Now, that's the foundation again. Like I said, there are so many aspects of forgiveness that we could discuss and should discuss, but that's the foundation, that's the basis of it. All right, so Joseph is having trouble. I don't want to rag on him. I just want us to understand. He's struggling. The brothers are struggling. The father's struggling back home. It's all full of struggle. They're trying to get through this and to resolve this, and of course it's only done ultimately by the grace of God working in our hearts and in our lives. All right, any questions or thoughts or comments? Okay.